All right, section 4, showing congruence. So all that we're doing in this lesson is we're going to be given a statement that says these two triangles are congruent, and we're going to have to symbolize how they are congruent, or we're going to have to just represent it in our figure how they're congruent. So starting off, let's just talk about two sample triangles. We'll say triangle, and that's just a little triangle. That means triangle. We'll say A, B, C. Right? So that's telling us that we have a triangle and its three corners are point A, point B, and point C. And then I have the congruent symbol, right? It's like an equal sign with a squiggly over it, right? We think about numbers being equal and shapes being congruent, right? Congruent means that they are equal. It's a fancy way to talk about being equal. So we'll say triangle ABC is congruent to triangle, we'll say X, Y, Z, right? So we have two triangles. We know they're congruent, they're the same. And we have this congruence statement here. Now, this congruence statement tells us more than that just the triangles are congruent. It tells us that angle A is congruent to angle X, right? Angle A is the first one listed in the first triangle. X is the first one listed in the second triangle. We could also say the middle ones are congruent. So angle B is congruent to angle Y. And then angle C is congruent to angle Z. Right? So it tells us which angles are congruent there. And then the thing is, how do we represent that two angles are congruent? If we have two angles here, right, and we'll just draw triangles in there. How do we say that? We'll say this is angle A and this is angle X. How do we say they're congruent? We do a little swoop through them. So B is congruent to Y, so you do a double swoop. Because it might be that it's congruent to A, but we don't know that it is. So by doing a double swoop, we're saying that the double swoops are congruent and they're different than the single swoop. Lastly, we have C, so we're going to do a triple swoop. Right. Some people, instead of doing multiple swoops, will have a swoop with a tally mark in it, or two tally marks, or three tally marks. So if you end up finding a video online and they use tally marks, that's what that means, right? If you have a swoop with a tally mark, it means that it's two swoops, a swoop with two tally marks, so on. I like just using plain old swoops instead of, or I don't know if swoop's the right word there, but that's what I'm going to use. That's what I like to use. Now, another thing this can tell us, it can talk about its segments. So we know that triangle ABC has segments AB, and we're going to put a little line over it to say it's a segment. That's like the side. It has segment BC, right? So I do the first two, and then the second two, and then I'm going to do the first and the last, right? Think about it kind of rolling over. So then we'll have CA. Now these, I'm going to be able to say the same thing about the second triangle here. So AB is congruent to the first and the second is X, Y. BC is the second two, so this will be YZ. And then CA is the last, then the first, so I'm going to do ZX. All right. So it tells us which of the angles and which of the sides are actually congruent, right? It tells us more than just that they're congruent. It tells us which parts of them are congruent. Now, I'm going to draw separate triangles just so that my tally marks and everything don't get all confusing. So here's the same triangle A, B, and C, and X, Y, and Z. Looking at my segment lengths, I know that AB is congruent to XY. So I'm going to use a tally mark like this to show that AB and XY are congruent. Now for the second thing, BC, which is right here, I'm going to use two tally marks this time, and YZ. Lastly, I have CA and XZ. And there we are. All that we're going to be doing in this lesson is putting all of these markings on the triangles. right? So we'll have the angles marked and the sides marked. All right, let's look at number 2. We have triangle JHI is congruent to triangle DCI. Well, I think the first thing that we should do is mark the angles. I think those are the easier ones to see. So J and D are in the first place, so they both get a single swoop. H and C are both in the second place, so they both get a double swoop. And then I and I gets triple swoops. All right, so now we've marked all of our angles. Now we need to move to the sides. JH is congruent to DC. HI is congruent to CI. And then the last side gets the 3 tally marks. All right. We'll check the last side just because. The last side is going to be IJ, yep, and ID. So there we are. That's our answer. And on Kudo, whenever it shows your answer, it will have 4 different options that all have different tally marks in different places. And you're going to have to pay attention to which one is the one that you want, that represents the correct congruence. All right, number 3. X and Y are both in the first place, so, well, let's think about this a little bit more. Since they're kind of sharing a side, it's kind of confusing. Let's outline them in different colors. So this will be triangle orange. So X, Y, Z is going to be this one. And I guess we really only need to outline one of them because we know the other one's the blank one. So now we have angle X and angle Y are congruent. X from the orange one, so I'll put a little swoop on the X and the orange one, and Y from the plain one. Right, so that takes care of my first angles. Next up we have Y from the orange one, so double swoop here, and X from the plain one. Lastly, we have Z and S, which are easy to see. Now let's do the sides. For our orange triangle, we have XY. Well, that's congruent to YX in the other one. Well, it's the same side, so that's going to be, that's it. That's all we have to write there. Next up, we have YZ. I'll put a double tally mark on that. And XS. So there's my other double tally mark. And then we have our last one with triple tally marks. And let's just double check it. We have ZX for the orange one. Yep, that's the 3 tally marker. And SY is this one here, which has the triple tally mark again. All right. So whenever they're sharing a side like this, it might be a little bit confusing with some of the labeling. And I think it's useful to, if you're doing this by paper, you might kind of bolden one of the sides of it with your pencil. That way you can kind of see which triangle is which. Because I think the X and the Y can sometimes get a little confusing there. All right, let's look at another one. Number 4. Well, this one's nice because they actually are separate. Q and T, so Q, T, R and U, R, U, S and V. All right. Now, let's do our sides. We have QR and TU. Then we have RS and UV. Lastly, we have SQ, which is the last side, and VT, which is the last side. Something neat that might be helpful to you is, let's look at the 3 side. The 3 side, look at the angles it's between. It's between the 1 swoop and the 3 swoop. On the other one, it's also between the 1 swoop and the 3 swoop. That's a rule for all your sides. They'll be between the same angles, right? So look at the next one. Let's look at QR over here. That's the single tally mark is between the 1 and 2 swoops. And the single tally mark over here is between the 1 and 2 swoops. That might be a good way to check your answer. Let's look at number 5. Triangle ABC, well, that's the triangle on the left, and then HCJ is the triangle on the right. So triangle A, triangle H, we know that A is congruent to H. We know that B is congruent to C. And then C, for the left one, is congruent to J for the right one. Now let's look at our sides. Starting off on the left triangle, we have AB, that'll get 1 tally mark, and HC, that'll get 1 tally mark. Then we have BC with 2 tally marks, and CJ with 2 tally marks. And then our last one that's left over gets our 3 tally marks. Number 6. S, that's talking about our left triangle. S gets a swoop, and J gets a swoop. T is a new angle, and it's congruent to K. And last we have R and I. All right, let's talk about our sides. For the first one, we start off with ST. That'll get 1 tally mark. And for the second triangle, JK. Next up, we have TR with a double tally mark, and KI with a double tally mark. And our one left over gets 3 tallies. Number 7. We have triangle IGH and triangle IBC. Well, let's look at this. IGH, well, that's the bottom. So I'm going to say bottom and top. That way it kind of reminds me which triangle is which. So starting off the bottom triangle, I have I is congruent to I of the top one. Which that makes sense because those form vertical angles, right? They're like opposite angles, and they have to be congruent. Then we have G and B. And lastly, H and C. For our sides, we have IG, that's this side, and IB, that's this side. Then we have GH, which will be this side, and BC, which is this side. And our side left over gets 3 tally marks. All right, 2 more problems. Well, starting off, we could list in our vertical angle. That's going to be P is congruent to P. PQR, that's the bottom. Maybe I'll just do a little arrow down. And PGE is the top one. All right, that helps me to know where I'm going to be labeling. So I already took care of P. Let's look at Q. Q will get a double swoop. And Q is in the middle, G is in the middle, so it'll get a double swoop. And then lastly, we have R, which is the only one left, and E, which is the only one left. Looking at our sides, we start off with PQ, that's this side there, and PG. Next up, QR, which will be this one here, and GE. And our last one left, or our last ones left, get the 3 swipes. Number 9, last one. K is congruent to C, J is congruent to A, and lastly I and B. Looking at our sides, we say, well, KJ and CA, then JI and AB. And lastly is IK and BC. All right, that's that. Hopefully that isn't too crazy. I think that takes more time than it takes thought. So hopefully that goes over well. Let me know if you have any questions.